share my screen. All right, everyone can see, huh? So there are some really cool things that we can do in databases that we didn't really cover yesterday that make it really easy for us to do analysis, get some, do some data aggregation, those sorts of things. So we're going to take a look at a few of those right now before we dive into the next thing. So the first function we want to take a look at is the count function, right? What the count function does is, I'm sure you'd imagine, it counts the number of rows that are returned, right? And so if I was to say select count ID from test.roast minutes, right? This is going to say that there are 5 total records that came back from this query, right? It would be the same as us saying, right, like, right, select, right, it's showing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Count is going to aggregate those together and return just the number, right? So it's like counting those out. So this can be combined with a where clause, right? So let's select. Right, good. Let's add a few extra roasts in here, huh? So we've got roast ID. Let's make roast ID 2, minute 1, 100, eating, yummy. All right, we'll do 2, 2, 1, 180, eating, yummy. 2, 3, 225, eating, yummy. 2, 4, 300, cooking, yummy. And then like 2, 2, 5, 305, cooking. All right, cool. So we got a couple of different roasts in here, right? So if we did select star from test roast minutes, you can imagine from the perspective of our application, right? We're looking at roast number 1, right? We're going to see how many minutes total is this roast tracking, right? So our real clause is going to have a where clause in here. It's going to say where roast ID equals 2, maybe, right? That's the page we're on. So if we wanted to get a total count, we could say count, and we can do it like this, and it's going to tell us there are 5, whereas the count of the entire table gives us 10. Okay, so count counts, right? Counts the number of records that are returned in the result. Any questions about count? Right? Roast ID equals 2. Now, what if, right, if we do select star, what if we wanted to get the maximum cooking temperature that was seen in these results? Okay, there is also a function called max, and we could say temp here, right? We're going to say the maximum value of the temp column, and it's going to return 305. Okay, we can also do min, which is the minimum, and that's going to give us 100 in these results, right? If we took out the where clause, it's going to be the maximum for the entire table, right? So 100 was our lowest temperature there. Max, let's see, I think we had a 350. No, 305 was our highest in this one, right? But if we had one roast that was ridiculous, let's open this up again. Select rows. Yeah. Let's make this 1,000. Right. Then this query will return. Oh, I have to commit my results. Commit. Yep. Finish. Then this query will return 1,000. Right. It's always going to give you the highest value in the table that it's looking at. Now we cannot put multiple things in here. I can't put temp ID. Right. That's an invalid thing, right? We're only looking at one specific column. But we could do select max temp, max ID, right? Yep. So the highest temp is 1,000. The highest ID is 10, right? We can also do min. So this is where we can start to do some inline inside of our database queries, data analytics. If you wanted to get the highest user ID, or you wanted to get the, some kind of value from here, we could use max and min to give us that, and counts will give us the total count. What else do we have in roast minutes? Okay, right. So we've got these phases: heating, developing, cooking. Right. What if we wanted to change the way those phases read? Right. So let's do ID, roast ID, phase. Right. Right. right now it says heating and it's lowercase, right? So we can do ucase, which is a function, which will uppercase the return coming back, heating. And if for some reason that was uppercase and we wanted to make it lowercase, we could do lcase, which is a function. And so it's going to lowercase it. Now you'll notice that when we're doing this, it says ID, roast ID, lcase, ucase, phase. The column name coming back is changed to lcase, ucase, phase. If we wanted to have this display a usable name, which is going to be very important as we start dealing with the Node.js side when we're doing complicated queries like this, we have an alias mechanism built into MySQL. And we can say as phase name, right? So whatever we put after the as is going to rename this column as that, right? So if I run this now, you'll notice, you'll notice that the column title is now phase name, right? We can do this for any column we want. You can do roast minutes ID, right? That's going to change this column to roast minutes ID. And that's important. This is critically important for us because as we start doing queries inside of Node.js, the name of the field that comes back from our data object is going to be named the thing, right? So it would be like results.roastID, results.phaseName. If you did not put an alias in here, it'll be like results lcase, ucase, phase or something ridiculous, right? So putting an alias when we're using these things is super important as phase name if you're gonna be using functions and stuff. If you've got good column names already, like roast ID, just leave it as roast ID. There's no need to alias it. Like roast ID alias. I don't know. There's no reason to do that. Go ahead, Josh.
So what is so you have L case and then within there it's U case. So you're saying lowercase to uppercase phase?
Yeah, I was showing off that this U case is a function. I had already stored all of those as lowercase letters.
Okay.
So L case on the lowercase result would have done nothing because it's already lowercase. But I wrapped L case around the uppercase of phase. So these are functions, right? These are MySQL functions. So when we call this, it's acting just like a regular Node.js or JavaScript function. It's the function name followed by parentheses, and whatever the argument is passed to that function. So the argument to this L case is the result of uppercase of the phase column.
Okay.
And I was just showing off that when you call L case, it does lowercase it. But if I do L case here, just by itself, it's going to do nothing because phase is already lowercased. No change. Cool. Sum. Let's say we wanted to temp from roast minutes where roast ID equals 2. Okay, so we're just taking our temps. Wait, what? Roast. It's right here. Roast minutes. I must not have used it. Use test. Okay. Select temp from roast minutes. Okay. All right. So these are all of our temps. If for some reason, right, this is going to happen more often with like financial information when you're storing dollars, pennies, things like that. Sometimes you need to sum all of these up. Right? Sum the temps. And get like what is our total combined temperature. Right? So the sum here is 2947. Now, what can we do with sums and with counts? We can average things, right? So if we wanted to, we could do the sum of temp divided by the count of temp, which will give us our average temperature of 294.7. Okay? And we could do the same thing with the where clause. Where roast ID equals 2. Okay? So the average temperature of roast 2 was 361 because roast 2 had that 1/1000 temperature roast in it. Whereas the average temperature of roast 1 was 228. Okay? Now, this would be doing it ourselves. There is also an average function that does that for us. one function gives us the average, so we don't have to do the sum divided by the count. Okay? And you'd probably want to alias these as well, like average temp, so that in your query, right, you got a nicely named column. And so generally where this would come up is you'd say like ID temp, roast ID, comma, average temp. Right? So you can see, hey, the first temp was 100, but you'll notice, right, if we took off this average, right, we get all 5 elements. But as soon as you put the average in here, it goes to 1. And that's because this is known as a aggregate function, right? It's going to take all of the values that it sees in the return and aggregate them together into one row. So you're only getting one record back because the records have been combined by the database. So if you wanted to get the average temperature as a part of your query, right, what we can do is a subquery, right? So I can do select average temp from roast minutes, where roast ID equals 1 as average temp, right? So we're asking for the columns ID, temp, roast ID, and then we're asking for the result of average in here as a column, right? So each row in this, what did I do wrong here? Let's see here. Why is this such a bad interface? You have an error in your SQL. Average. Oh, because I clicked the stupid wrong button. Perfect. So now you get all 5 records, but the aggregate function is running for each row of the record. Right? Sometimes this is what you want, sometimes it's not. I mean, the downside to this is called a subquery, and so this is going to run 5 times for each row in the database. Right? And so if we were to run explain here, explain, if you put the word explain before any query, it's going to show you what MySQL is doing, right? So it's got a primary telling you how, what indexes it used to look things up, and then it says it's got a subquery. So this can be inefficient over a long period of time. Okay? But just know that that's available to you. This is a subquery. Okay? Any questions about average, group, count, max, any of those? There's another function that we use pretty often. We've been seeing it in some of our date time fields. It's the now function, which is going to give you a date specific to now, right? So if you need a timestamp or you need something that is, you need to know the server time, right? Now will always give you that time. Right? You can see every time I run this, we're getting a different second in that place. Any questions about any of those? Go ahead.
So is there a way to like save that query that you just created there? So like if I want to make like a custom table with maybe what you have here and link it to our other table that we created, is there a way to do that?
What do
Like
you mean by save it?
So like if I want a table, a new, or like in the views, that creates like a custom where you can.
Yeah, a view is like creating a fake table that you can query to get. It's basically like a way to alias really complicated queries into one simple table.
Okay, so maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
If I wanted to get like you showed earlier, like the app. So if I want to show on my app, like, hey, for your first roast, so that very first one, the average temperature was whatever 300 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you do that?
I would write that query just like we did before.
So you don't have to use 2 different tables because we have table 1 with our. Didn't we go over 2 different tables?
We have the roast table that contains the roast itself, and then the minutes is the individual cook times inside of there. There's a one-to-many relationship with those 2 tables. So what were you talking about? So you wanted to say select ID. Let's do select star from roast. Okay, so that's our first table, right? We got 2 roasts in there, 1 and 2. You wanted to get what exactly?
So from within that roast, I want to know um, the average temperature
Okay.
of the roast.
So if I was writing, if all I cared about at this stage was getting the average temperature, right? The first thing we need to do, let's do r.id, r.user.id, r.target.temp, r.roast.date, right? r.batch size, r.batch size unit, r.coffee type. Okay, and then, so I'm going to alias the table here, right? So I'm going to say as r. So what goes before the dot in the column names is the table name. So if I didn't alias this as r, I'd have to type out roast every time. So this is going to give me the exact same thing that select star was doing. Then let me drag this down so we got a little bit more space to play with. Okay, so then we want to get the average, right? So I'm going to left join this table. Left join roast minutes as rm on roast.id r.id equals rm.roastid, right? So now what I'm going to get, if I run this, right, I'm going to get nothing extra, but I've got all of the I could get the rm.temp, right? That's going to be our roast temp, right? So what I can do is I can say average rm, average with a V and not a B, rm.roasttemp. So we're going to see, and then we need to put in a group by r.id. And we'll talk about group by here in a second. Right? So we have averaged the roast temp for each of those roasts as a part of this main query because we brought in roast minutes that has all the temperatures in it. And we said, hey, that is going to join to this record. And you'll notice if I did not put this group by in here, right, it was giving us... so the problem is an aggregate function like average, it assumes that everything that comes back as a result is being averaged. Where did it go? What happened? What did I do here? Did I type something wrong? Oh, there we go. So the average of the entire thing was 294, even though we've joined them together. What group by? So because average is an aggregate function, it squishes everything in the results back. Group by is a SQL keyword that says, hey, we're using an aggregate function, but I want you to treat r.id, roast.id column, as the one we're treating as groups. And so it gives you two separate averages. And so I might even come in here and alias this as like average temp. Okay. So averaging on your roast thing is really interesting, right? If you start off cold, you might think, hey, my roasting temperature is 350, but really the magic has happened because you roasted for 10 minutes at an average temperature of 280 or something, right? So having a longer cook or having a shorter cook or having starting it off with a preheated plate, right? Like those things could affect the roast quality and the roast flavor. That might be a really interesting thing to chart and look at over time in a roasting type of app. So I would just do this as a query. I wouldn't make a view out of this. If we wanted to make a view, right, we could make a view that says like main view, and you just select star for main view, and it's already got all these columns already predefined like this. But it's just as easy to type the query as it is to like type a query to get from a view, and then you've got to worry about maintaining and updating the view all the time. But a view lets you do stuff like this where you've got a complicated query and it creates like a fake table that will have these values in it. So it'd be like if you had a table that looked like this. Cool, good question. Any others? And the same would be true if we wanted to say count, right? Count RM temp, right? This would tell us our minutes, essentially, as total minutes. Right? This is going to do the same kind of thing, right? If we want to see how many minutes we're cooked, right? We have two 5-minute steps. And you can combine them, right? You can say average RM temp as average temp. Okay, so you cooked it for 5 minutes at an average temperature of 228 versus you cooked it for 5 minutes at an average temperature of 361. So you can start doing some really interesting like data analysis stuff straight here in MySQL. Now, you could also do this exact same analysis in JavaScript, in Node, when you're actually programming. And sometimes I'll write code to do this complicated analysis, and sometimes I'll let the database do it. It really just depends on what I'm trying to do, where I want my code to be complicated versus where I want my database to be complicated. Over time, I think you'll get a feel for when you should do more complicated stuff in your queries versus doing it, just straight up in your app. Because when you join tables like this, you can imagine if there was thousands and thousands of records, in both tables, right? Some of these queries can start to become a little slow. When in reality, you just want to get the data into your programming language so you can count up the averages really quickly. Sometimes, from a performance standpoint, you'll have to make those decisions. One last thing I want to show off, which is how we do searching on text fields. I'm going to leave this up. Okay. So select star from roast minutes, right? So we've got our notes here. If we wanted to search in this notes thing and look for like anything that said yummy, good, let's make a couple other ones, right? Let's say like smells odd. Let's make tasty. Tastes great, right? So we've got a couple different like realistic note scenarios in here. Let's say you wanted to actually be able to search on these notes, right? This is a pretty common web development thing. You got to build some kind of search engine. So the way we do this, right? So we know that we can do where notes equals smells good. Good, right? But the problem with this is that it relies on you typing in your search query exactly like what it's stored in the database. If I just wanted to search for like anything that had the word smell in it, instead of doing equals, I'm going to say like, and then I'm going to put in the wildcard of a % sign. So now it's going to find smells good and smells odd. It finds both of them because they both contain smell followed by something else. And what you'll generally see when you have this type of search mechanism in MySQL is that people will put a % sign on both, and they'll say, just find the word anywhere in here, right? So I'm going to put 2 L's as an example, right? It's going to find both smells good and smells odd. So you can imagine when we're writing our code in Node.js, this will end up being like a variable. Search variable, something like that. Right? This won't find anything, obviously, because we don't have that string in our thing. But you can imagine that what's actually happening is the word that the user has typed in is being replaced in here, so that if I said taste, right, it's going to find all the one that says tastes great, or taste, let's say good, right, smells good, finds all of those. And if we put in just empty % signs, right, it finds every record. Cool. This is the wildcard operator, I guess. What would you call it? Wildcard character. And then it's used in conjunction with any field that's text. So varchar, car, text, any of those that contains characters. You use the like keyword instead of the equals. All right, equals is going to look for exact matches. Yummy. Like plus the wildcard is going to look for similar words. You'll also notice if we go back to like. To smell wildcard, right? You'll notice it's finding capital S and lowercase s. So it's case insensitive searching. Okay. Any questions about searching on text? No? All right. The last thing that we're going to dive into today, and we're going to spend all the rest of today doing this, is a combination of working with MySQL in our database, but we're going to introduce the EJS templating language, okay? And so for that, we're going to switch back to our editor. So let's see, what were we working on yesterday? It was something cool. Open folder. Development. CBC13. There we go. What do we call it? MySQL project. Yeah, MySQL intro. Right here. Perfect. All right. So this is what we built yesterday. We built a little simple web app that takes a user ID. Right? It's got a list of users that's pulling from that table that we built. If we run this with node index.js, what did I make the 5555? Good. Localhost 5555. Right? It was grabbing this list of users from the database, and we click it, it goes to some user page that loads just that one record. Right? So this is kind of the realistic thing. Right? If we were doing this with roasts, right? We might write /roast ID, and we're outputting that. So you'll notice that we're outputting just simple HTML strings so we could have this be displayed in the page. But what we really want to do is load big, beautiful HTML pages, right? We don't want to have our HTML pages being done in this kind of weird fashion. So what we're going to use is EJS. EJS is a templating language. So we're going to say npm install EJS. Okay? And EJS was designed really hand in hand to work super well with what happened here? We did that yesterday too. Just rerun it and it works perfectly. Super weird. And so what EJS lets us do is build HTML pages and swap out portions of the page with data with variables that we pass to it from JavaScript, right? Where's our EJS thing, right? So what we do now that we have EJS installed is we don't have to require it. It's already installed and Express already knows about this. But what we simply do is we say app.use and then we do view engine, and then the value is EJS. So now EJS is installed and ready to go. Okay? By default, it's doing nothing. But if we make, let's say, index.ejs here, right? Cool. And I'm going to put in the template, right? Cool page, right? I'm going to put in some information here. H1, cool secret EJS page. H1. Okay. Let's make ourselves a route really quick. App.get /EJS. So when I go to EJS, we want it to load this page. Res. Okay. And so instead of doing res.send, which was sending back the content, or doing res.json, which is sending back JSON objects for us, we're going to use res.render. Okay? Res.render. And what it does is it takes a view string, so we'll say index. Okay? And then we say, then we can pass in variables. So I can say like something cool. Right? So res.render should call our index.js if we run this. Oh, I already installed EJS. Oops. So if we run this now, I think we skipped a step, but we'll just test and see what happens. If I call EJS now, yep, it threw an error because we did not put it in the folder. Runner.use requires a measure while function. String. Must have turned it on incorrectly. Let's look this up real quick. EJS. Cool. Yep. Acquire EJS. Good. Res.render. What's there? Let's see. How will we search for this? EJS and Express. Okay, cool. Yep, npm init. Good. App set. Oh, I did app set. I did app use instead of app set. All right, perfect. So when we run this now, okay, we load this page. Right, it says failed to look up view index in views directory. So it assumes that there's going to be a views folder called views. Okay, and so if we put any of these index templates that we want in this views folder, yep, index.ejs, so it has a .ejs extension here. Now when I run this code, it will load our cool secret EJS page. Now, right off the bat, right? This is HTML, so you know everything is like up to us to style, right? We can still, because we have our static folder in here declared, right? We can put in our EJS template all of the HTML stuff that we'd expect. Link rel equals style sheet. Href equals style.css. Do we have any styles in there? Oh, let's just make one real quick. Body, background color, medium, turquoise. Good. Okay. So now when we reload this page, right, we're seeing that CSS be rendered. But more importantly, and this is where things get really cool and really spicy, right? We passed as the second argument to res.render an object. So we said something is cool. Okay, something is cool. What we can do inside of our EJS here is we can say, right? And we'll do something. Okay. I think this works. Reference error. Something is not defined. What did I call it? Oh, something. Cool. So it replaces the value of the variable in this object, whatever this, right? This says cool. So when I use this template string, which is like a HTML tag, but it has a % and a dash, it replaces the value of that variable with what is here on the page, right? You can see that our HTML here just says cool, right? If I wrap this, maybe this will show this off a little bit better. I wrap this in a paragraph tag. You'll notice that this now has a paragraph tag there. Okay, so what we can do with this is that we can build beautiful HTML templates. And now when we're writing our code to get stuff out of the database, instead of calling, doing res.send and putting in output strings like this, we can send this as an array to our template and let our template loop through this and put it in as output. So let's rewrite this user ID as a thing, right? So what it does is it gets results from the users table. So let's look at this page. Okay, so I'm gonna use this one as the main thing. All right. So instead of having an output string like this, right? We've got results already. Results is already an array. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say res.render, and I'm gonna say index, and I'm gonna pass in something cool, because our template is looking for a variable called something. If it doesn't exist, it's going to get angry at us. But then we're going to say user list is results. Okay? And then all the rest of this code can go away. Res.render is going to call that EJS template and pass it this user list of results. Here, let's just take out this cool thing. Yeah, we get this. This makes sense to us. Okay? So now in our template, instead of doing this, right, what we're going to do is we're going to loop through this. So we're going to do this time without a dash. Okay, so if you do the EJS tag here with a dash, it's doing a direct insertion of whatever the value is. If you do it without a dash, it's going to execute the code. So what we can do is we can say for var let I equal 0, I is less than, what did we call this? User list. User list dot length I++. Okay, and this line of code needs to be terminated with a thing, right? So anything that happens between these two template tags is going to be in this loop. So I can, outside of my loop, put in a UL, put in another UL, and what is in our star? Oh yeah, so we can do like li, and we'll do result user list I dot ID, user list I dot what do we have? Username? I don't remember. Right, so we're writing HTML, and EJS is letting us swap out variables from JavaScript with what we have here. Right, so if we reload this page, I forgot to view page search. Oh, I need to restart my server. Oops. What's going on here? Oh, that's we did it in the wrong one. So we need to do this down here as well. So we replaced that entire loop where we're generating output, and we are missing catch or finally after try. What is this? Now here's what we got to do. So the problem here is, and what this is telling you is kind of esoteric, right? We're in this results. This is not a real array. This is a results list from MySQL. It's a special type of class. So what we need to do probably is let results user list equal array, and we'll simply loop through this. Let I equal 0, I is less than results dot length, I plus plus, user list dot push results I. This should work, hopefully. Let's restart our server. Still errored, huh? What is it expecting here? Let's just put in an empty array and see what happens. Nope. Missing try. Let's look this up and see what Google has to tell us. Are we missing a? Yeah, we're missing a curly bracket here for our loop. Good. So there we go. Yep. So if we go back to here and turn this off, let's go back to how it was. Okay. Yeah. And now, why is our ID not showing up? That's interesting. We're getting the username. So let's debug our query real quick. Select star from users. Select star from users. Good. ID is right there. What do you mean there's no ID field? You dang liar. User list dot ID. Let's console log results. Console log results. And restart our server. So when we go to this page, what do we get here? ID is literally right there. You guys see that, right? User list ID. Oh, we forgot our dash here after the tag. Right? So the tag with the dash does the replacement. So now we get the ID. And we've done that, right? We have a beautiful HTML page, and we're letting JavaScript, the templating engine, EJS, replace variables and values into our output that we're sending to the user. So from the user's perspective, they're just getting HTML. But behind the scenes, we've done all this cool JavaScript stuff, and the page HTML output has changed based on what we have told it from the server. Okay, there's a couple other things to note about EJS, and we're just going to cover them briefly because hopefully we'll practice with this, is the tags themselves, right? So less than sign % gives you code, right? So the code is going to execute. Okay, that's what we use for our for loop here. Right? We're saying, hey, I'm going to write some code, run it, and do whatever the code says. With an underscore instead of a dash, it's going to do white space slurping. So it's going to be like basically running trim on whatever we put on our output, right? So it's going to take, if there's any extra white space in the back or the front, it's going to remove it before it outputs the variable. This is what we were doing. With the dash, it's doing unescaped HTML into the template. This is dangerous unless you are 100% in control of the HTML. What we generally want to do when we're talking about database stuff specifically is you want to use the equal sign, right? So instead of this, right, let's do it with username, except maybe this is a good, nope. Right, you want to use the equal sign here, right? And the reason we would do that is to protect ourselves from cross-site scripting attacks, right? So everything still shows up here. But if I was to go in and change in our database, let's see, username. How big is this username field? We might have to edit this to show this off. Alter table. Varchar 50. Ah, that's perfect. We'll be fine. So what a user can do if they are able to put in information here, right? Instead of ERH, maybe I put script alert hello, right? Script. And let's apply that. Good. So they're actually putting JavaScript in our code here. If we do escape it, right? You see the JavaScript here. You see the HTML. If we turn this back to a dash, this is going to be rendered, and the JavaScript code has ran. So any place where you're going to display HTML, we're going to display values that a user has added to the page, right? Any user, you want to be very careful and always use the equal sign to make sure that it has escaped. I'll use dash all the time for, an ID field where I know that's created by the database. A user can't do anything harmful in there. But I'll use equal sign if it's like their email address or they've put something in, like a bio or something like that, where the user can write what looks like a bio and then put some JavaScript code that maybe runs on every page and steals cookies or steals your login credentials. So the equal sign will escape. And so now we're protected, or that JavaScript won't run. Other tags to look at, if you needed a comment for some reason, you can do the pound as a part of the tag, right? So that would be like this. Percent we are a comment, right? And it closes with that. And so now when this page loads, right, that comment doesn't show up. You can see the extra white space here because we got this line of code in here, but the comment is not rendered. Okay. Yep. And then at the end, right? So just like with the one that slurps the white space before it, if you close your tag with a dash, it will slurp the white space at the end. Right. So the function trims on both sides. But with EJS, if you need to remove the white space from the front and the back, right, you would do it with an underscore, and you would do it with it would remove that new line as well, right? So we can do this here and show this off, right? There is a new line right after this element. If I was to put this here, right, if you remember from our source code here, all these extra lines came in, right? Now those extra lines have disappeared because it took off that new line. And we could do the same thing here, right? It's going to take off that new line. Let's do it here. And so now everything's nice and tidy. So we put the dash in here to take off the new line. And the underscore will remove spaces, extra stuff like that. Any questions about EJS? This is really just the tip of the iceberg, and we'll play with this a little bit, right? So there's some extra functions, right? If you wanted to include, what we'll often do is we'll build a whole bunch of templates as components, and you'll include them on the page, like in this example, right? So they're doing something similar. They're looping through the users list, but instead of manually displaying an LI, they're including some other template and passing that user object to it to load, right? So you can build all these like little reusable components of HTML, cards, your roast minutes thing if you wanted, Josh, right? Where you got like, this is what a minute looks like with notes and stuff in it, right? You could just build that one beautiful minute, and as you're looping through your minutes, you're including that EJS template. Okay? All of these templates need to be inside of a views folder, but inside of this views folder, you can have subfolders. Something, right? And so we could have in here, let's make a, here, let's show this off. So instead of doing this, right, we're going to say, rename user. We're going to call this right, user list.ejs. Okay? And we'll paste that in here. Oh no. Oh, I didn't actually cut it. Okay. So, right. So what I'm going to do is just like with the so instead of having this be user list i.id, I can simply say user list.id. Because what I'm going to do here when I say include user list, I'm going to pass in user list is user list I. Right, so I'm passing the full value of the object. Okay. And so now when we load our page, right, it's doing the same thing. It's loading that template from in here. And if I was to come in here and make, let's make this strong, maybe. Strong. We reload our page, you can see those numbers are now strong. So it lets you build composable, reusable components and use them all over the place. So I might make a menu and include it on every page that needs a menu. I might make my header and include that as a header on every page that needs a header. And then really just focus on the main content and have that be pulled from our database. Any questions about any of this? Okay. It's 4:50. Let's take a break. Come back at 5:05, and then we're gonna play with EJS. I've got a little, a pretty nice little assignment that like get your feet wet in this environment. So 5:05. So maybe longer, depending how long it takes us. Is if you remember back like a week ago, we had been working on a to-do list app, and we had been like cheating and doing all this stuff like using local storage and doing a bunch of JavaScript front-end tricks to make it interactive, right? Like boop, boop, right? All that kind of stuff. But I said, hey, like we're doing things a weird way because we haven't introduced databases yet. We haven't introduced templating yet. But now we've got all of that, and I think it would be really cool to just take this concept and rebuild it entirely using EJS and using MySQL as our data storage layer. So what I'm going to do to just speed things up, I'm going to keep the HTML here, and I'm going to keep the CSS so we have a little bit of a style, and then we are going to build this entirely new, kind of from scratch, right? So I'm going to go to GitHub. I'm going to create a new repository. Okay, and I'm going to call this to do EJS. Okay, I'll make it public so you guys can look at this later. I'm going to add a get ignore of node and create repository. Okay, great. And I'm going to copy this and pull it in right, to our CBC12 folder, or CBC13 folder. Git clone. Good. All right, cool. So we got the folder now, up and running. Yep, that's the project. And I'm going to open that project here. To do EJS. Good. All right. Just like everything else, right? We need to get this set up to be a actual node project. So I'm going to type npm init. It's going to ask me to do EJS. Yes, version 1. Excellent. Keywords, author. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, good. The first thing I want to do is I want to install Express, EJS, and MySQL 2. Right, I'm going to need those 3 modules. So I'm going to install them all at once. Okay. Those are all there. And then I want, because I get sick and tired of restarting my server every time I make a change, I'm going to npm install nodemon, and I'm going to do -- save dev. So it will be in our development version. Okay. And then while that's working, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open package.json, and where the scripts link is, I'm going to add a script called dev, and I'm going to have that run nodemon index.js so that I can run my script with nodemon. It will reload every single time I make a source code change. So we're up and running. We got like the base configuration of our project. So I need to make a public folder so that I can put my CSS, if I ever do make JavaScript, I'll make a JavaScript, I'll make a CSS folder, and inside the CSS folder, just because I already did this once, we already built this page, I'm going to just copy the CSS that we built here, right? Okay, and I'm going to make a new file, and we'll call this todo.css. Okay, great. I got some style in here. I remember I gave this cute little trash can attribute. We're all good there. And next thing I want to do is I want to copy the HTML of this page just to give us like a starting point. Right? And so I'm going to come in here, I'm going to make a view folder, views, so that we can use EJS. And I'm going to call this index.ejs. I'm going to paste this in. Right? So right off the bat, like all we are so far is just an HTML framework. Right? And if I was to come in here and say, all right, so we don't need these JavaScripts anymore. Okay. ARC's to-do list. We got a style sheet, CSS to do. Yeah, great. So we need to make our JavaScript file, index.js. Right, that's our main application. Right, I'm going to say const express equals require express, const app equals express. I'm going to say const MySQL equals require MySQL2. I know I'm going to need that object as well. And just to make sure that we're kind of up and running, I'm going to say app.set view engine EJS. Okay. And then I'm going to say app.get slash is going to do rec res, and this function will call res.render index. Okay, so when we get any request to slash on this server, it is going to load this view template. And we'll start this with app.listen, and I'm going to say 7,000. I don't know, I just pick some random port. Okay, so now if I run npm run dev, it's going to run our server. It's running. And if I go to localhost port 7000, I should get my to-do list. Oh, I forgot to tell us the public directory. So I'm going to say app.use express.static public, so that our CSS file is accessible to the web server. Right? It restarted the server for me, and now I get exactly what I was kind of expecting. Okay? So I want to steal from my other project. Right? I want these templates here. Right? So I want whatever this is, right? Right, I've got my lists element, and I've got a couple of cards, list card, and then I've got a form. Right, all this is good. So I'm gonna just grab this straight from my editor here, because I don't want to have to retype all this stuff that we already did once. Okay, and I'll come back in here, make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see. Okay, and I'm just gonna come in here and I'm gonna pop down this list element. Okay, good. Right, so if I load this page now, the new one we built, I've got my create new list function here, and if I look at this, this goes to /new list. But I'm going to write this in a way that makes it easier for me to develop against, right? So I'm going to maybe say /new, right? When I post to /new, it creates a list, okay? And then we know that our template, if we were to go back to this page, right, kind of what we have here is, let's just grab this one as an example, because we're going to use this. Let's edit as HTML, so I can grab the full shebang and use it in my template while I build this. Oh, that's lists. I grabbed too much. I just want this one. Edit as HTML. Just want to grab a single card. So I'm going to use this as a template while I am building the rest of the app. So give ourselves a little bit of nice formatting here. Form. Okay, we have an H2 in here. We have UL, LI, right? So we're just stealing our code. And then the final LI has our form in it, right? So that's good. So, all right, so we should have on our new program now, yeah, we got a to-do list. We got a new list here. It looks like, oh, we forgot our div class list. So this element needs to be inside of this one, because lists, if you recall, was our flex container, right? From here, right? Lists was our flex container. So when I do this now, this should, yeah, it pops up just like it was before, and we still get all of our nice little CSS cutesy stuff that I put in. But now what we want to do is we want it so that when I am in a list, right, list /0, when we post to it, it's going to store in a database. Okay, so we've got to create a database so that we can actually have this render and load all of our content when we go to this page, right? Instead of this being static HTML that we've coded here, we want this to be like a loop that loops through our records so that we can make a database. So what I would do at this stage, I'm going to make a file. I'm going to call this dbschema.sql. Right? I always like to keep a record of what my database structure looks like in my projects. I can check it into version control, and as I'm building new tables, as I'm building new structures, I can always recreate my database when I need to deploy it and stuff like that. It's a really useful technique. So I know I'm going to need a to-do list table, right? Like a lists table, and those lists then will have list icon. So we'll think of it like this, like lists table contains like the list title, and then we'll have a list items table that will have each of the items, whether it's completed or not, whether it's all those things that we want to do, right? So I'm going to create these tables now. And the syntax for this is create table, and then we'll call this lists, okay? And then I'm going to say engine equals inodb char set equals utf8 mb4, okay? All right. So I need an ID column. That is going to be an int, not null. I'm going to make this unsigned so that it doesn't have negative numbers. Int unsigned, not null. Okay. And then I'm going to have a list title. Well, let's just call it title because we're already in the lists table, right? So I'm going to call it title, and it's going to be a varchar. Let's make this 255. Might as well make it full width, and I'll say not null default empty string. What else do we need? Let's maybe add a user ID. Right? We don't have login stuff. We haven't learned about login mechanisms yet, but like we know we're going to need to say this is Eric's list, this is Olivia's list. We want to keep this separate. Right? So I'm going to say int unsigned not null. Okay, and then I'm going to say primary key ID. Okay, so that's pretty much all we need to like create a lists table. Okay, so I'm going to actually move user ID. I like to keep all my keys kind of together in the table structure. Right, so a list is going to have an ID, which is the ID of the list, a user ID, which is, when I make a users table, that'll be me, or it'll say like user ID 1, user ID 2, and then we're going to have a title, and then the primary key is this. So I should be able to copy this. Right, first I need to make a database schema. So I'm going to do this in, I don't have PHP MyAdmin. Let's do that. I'll do this way so that you guys can see how this is done. I'm going to go localhost 8080. Oh, and we'll go to PHP MyAdmin. Okay. All right. I'm going to make a new database schema, right? So that you remember a database or a schema contains tables, so we need to make a new one of these, and I'm going to call this to-do lists. Good enough. All right, database to-do list was created, and now what I'm going to do is, since I'm already in the to-do list table, rather than creating a table the slow way, I'm going to use the actual SQL here to do it. All right, so now I've got a lists table. Perfect, exactly what we wanted. It's got ID, user ID, and title. Now I need a list, what do we call it? List items. So I'm going to do create table list items engine inodb char set equals utf8 and do 4. Okay, cool. The list item will have an ID, int unsigned not null. Oh, we should have made this auto increment. Ooh, we made a mistake here. So we're going to go auto increment. We're going to change our schema so that we make sure that our table is correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the table because I created it. So if I do drop table lists, it's going to completely delete that table, and it will let me create it now with an auto increment column, which is what we want. Okay, so now list is back. Go ahead.
What happens if, say, you started writing to that table and then realized after maybe you didn't make that mistake, but a different mistake, you need to change the table? Is there any way you can change that without having to drop the table?
Absolutely. From PHP MyAdmin, you can come in here and you can modify the structure. You can say change. If it's one specific column that you want to be able to make changes to, like mark it back as auto increment, or you can change. You can add an extra column. Add one column after title, after ID, after user ID if you needed to add extra stuff. Excuse me. What this is doing, what PHP MyAdmin is doing here is it's giving you the mechanism. We didn't really cover this yesterday, but there is a SQL syntax called alter table. Okay, and what alter table does is it lets you make any changes you want to a table, right? You say alter table customers, add email varchar 255, right? That's that same thing if we wanted to add an extra table. You can add extra, modify a column, add some data type to it. Anything you want to do in a database, you can do with SQL by itself. Oftentimes when I'm building a table for the first time, right, like this, I'm going to just live in here because I know exactly what I'm doing. It's easier for me to type it. But I could have, right? Let's build list items this way, right? So we want to build a new table, list items. All right. We need ID, int, not null, primary key, auto increment. Yeah. Auto increment. What's next? We need a list ID, which is going to be an integer linking to the list it belongs to. And so we're going to make that not null. Good, everything's fine. And then we'll have like the actual list item itself. So we'll say item. And we want to make this varchar 255. So we have enough letters to like make this, take the dog for a walk, pick up groceries, right? All of our list items. And then the last thing we want to probably do is have a status field where it's like either going to be not done or done, right? So we can make this like a Boolean, really. We can say it's either true or false, or we can just call it complete, right? Boolean, and we'll make the default value false or 0, right? We can do the default is not complete. Okay, so let's save this. Okay, and if we were to, because we said that we want to save our database structure in this file so that anyone who's working on our team can see it, I can run this SQL command that says show create table list items, right? And go. And then what we have to do is here we have to click full text because this thing is kind of silly. But now we can copy this create table syntax directly into here. And it gives me spaces instead of tabs, which drives me crazy. But it's doing the exact same thing that I was just typing in up here. So create table, list items, ID int 11 not null, auto increment, list ID int 11 not null, item varchar 255 not null, complete tiny int 1 not null, default 0, right? So that's going to be like a true or false value. 1 is true, 0 is false. And the primary key is ID. Okay? So doing exactly the same thing we were typing up here, we can build it in phpMyAdmin, or we can build it in, any, if we're using, right, I can come in here and say use, what did I call it? To-do lists. And then I can say show create table list items. Okay? And that's going to give me that same value. And I'm going to have to copy field, right? And it's giving us this. Show create table gives us back the create table syntax. Okay. So we've got a database structure. Pretty happy with this, right? I've got, if I refresh this, right, I've got to-do list here. It's got 2 tables. So let's add a few items so that we can have, right? So let's say user ID is 1, title is first to-do list, okay? And let's apply this. Apply, finish. So we haven't figured out what we're going to do about user IDs yet, but we at least now have a table that has a list ID. It's got an ID for us, and it's got a title, okay? And then we have a list items. Let's add some stuff in here. All right, I'm going to add, so list ID 1 is our first to-do list, so we'll say test, complete 0, that's fine, 1, test 2. We'll make this one as complete, so we'll have something to play with. And we'll say, buy a Snickers. And this is incomplete, okay? I'm going to add those 3 rows. So we've got now 3 items in our list table, okay? So what's up next, right? We want to have it so that when we call res_render, we're passing in, right? When we go to get, when we go to slash, we're loading the index page, and we're passing in the to-do list that belong to me, right? So we need to, let's comment this out. So fetch all open to-do lists from the user logged in. And for right now, we'll use user ID 1, right? We're going to figure out authentication in a little while, or maybe later. But for now, we're just going to we need to make a query, right? So we query the database, and we're going to pass in some object to our template. That would be like a to-do lists, right? Some kind of array. Okay. Cool. So what is our to-do list going to look like, right? It's going to be an array of lists. So maybe let's fake this out before we even, right? So let's just make a let fake list equals, right, an array. And inside here is going to be, what did we have before? It's going to be like a title, and it's going to be like a fake to-do list entry, and then items will be an array itself. Okay, so each entry in here is going to be an object that is going to have a, what do we call it in our database? An item? Yeah. So we'll say item. Item is going to be like do something, and complete is false. Okay. Second one is going to be item do something else, and we'll make this complete is true. And the other thing that's missing is we know we're going to be passing an ID for each of these things. We're going to need that ID. So we'll say ID is 1, ID is 2, and then the list itself will have an ID. So we'll say list ID 1. All right, so we're going to pass in fake list, because that's pretty much what our object is going to look like when we do query the database. All right, so we're going to call the index template. We're going to pass a to-do list array that has each element is a separate list with items inside of it. Okay. So in here now we can start coding this, right? And so we can say, right, we're going to use EJS now. We can say if to-do list dot length, right? So we need to check and make sure that we actually have elements in here, right? Because if I pass an empty array, we don't want to display HTML for a list we don't have. So we're going to wrap the entire thing in if to-do list dot length, and then to close out our loop, right, we put in a EJS tag that is empty, and it just has the close brackets. Right. All right. So what I probably want to do, can I make this multi-line? Let's see. Can I run code like this? I don't know. Let's test. All right. So what I want to do is, if I've got to-do list items, I want to loop through them for let I equals 0, I is less than to-do list dot length I plus plus. Okay, good. And let's come in here and close that loop. So I should see, in theory, because I'm passing fake list, I called it to-do lists. To-do lists. There we go. Because I'm calling it, I should see this element. Because we're not doing anything with it yet. I'm not actually reading any of the values from inside of to-do list, but I should see at least this. Like, if to-do list is not being passed in EJS correctly, then this will fail, and it'll skip over this element completely. So I should be able to come in here, port 7000, and I do indeed still see my code. And we could just verify this and say, like, right? So I can come in here and just swap out the title here and say equals to-do lists I dot title. Right? That's the name of our field from the to-do list array that we have here, title. So when I save this template, and I reload, I see now fake to-do list entry, which is exactly what we put in here. Okay? Now I want to do the same thing for each of the items, right? So I'm going to just create this, right? I'm going to say if to-do lists I dot items dot length, right? So if there's items in this array, then we want to loop over them for let. We're going to have to call this a different thing because we already have I being used up there. So we'll say J. J is less than to-do lists I dot items dot length J plus plus, right? So close out my EJS template tag, right? Just like that. And then what we're going to do is, right? I'm going to, right? Percent. I need to close out both of my curly brackets and close out this template, right? So the looping happens in here, right? So while I'm looping through all those items, it's giving us an li of class item. It's going to give it a data item ID, which, if you remember, that was what we were using in our previous JavaScript, but I think it's a pretty good idea to like keep this for now. Let's see, to do, so we want to put in, here, let's actually make a reference so this is even easier. Let item equals to do lists I dot items j. Right, so we're just going to have item be a reference to whatever one we're currently looping through. Okay, so in here I'm going to put percent equals, and I'm going to say item, what do we call it, ID? Yep. Same thing here, item dot ID. Okay, and then instead of saying beer here, it's going to say item dot item. Right? Is that what we did here? Item. Yep, good. And then percent. Good. So now, if we reload this page, right, do something else. Those are the two items we put in here. As fake items. We made one of them as complete already. So we already designed this in our previous app. If we go back to our code, you can even see it here, right? So if it's completed, we want to give it the class of done. Okay. So what I can simply do is in here I can say percent equals, or maybe I can just do percent minus here, because this is not user controlled at all, right? They're not typing in complete or not. And what I can do is item dot complete, right? If it's true, done. Otherwise, nothing. So I'm using a ternary conditional operator here. I'm saying if the item has a dot complete, and if that's true or false, if it's true, it's going to put done here. Otherwise, it's going to put nothing. Okay. So now you should see when we reload this page, yeah, that one goes to the dashed line through it, just like we'd expect. And if I was to come in here and actually change this to true, right? Now you'll see both of those. Both of those now have a dash through it. Okay, so we got our data, we got our template now, kind of set up to do exactly what we were doing before. Okay, but still, right, so this is looping through the items in the array, if we have this from a database somewhere, this is looping through our items. Then below that we have a form, and you'll notice the form is saying we want to post something to /list0, right? So when we post something to /list0, we're going to add a new item. So we're going to have to write that, but we want to make this dynamic. So what I'm going to put here is to do lists I.id, right? We want to take this ID from the list itself, because that's going to be stored in the database. We're not having this, that's not like an ID of an array or an index of an array. We're going to have this in a database somewhere, and as multiple users using this might be list ID 45, right? We just need to get whatever that number is and put it in this element so that we're always going to be posting the /list and then some ID. So I'm actually going to copy this. I'm going to put this in here as a to-do for ourselves. So I'm going to say to-do app.post, right? And I'm going to put that in there just as a reminder of what we're trying to get to, right? We have to write a post route to handle this thing, right? That's going to add a new item. Add new item. Okay. So that takes care of the to-do list. So if they've got multiple lists, good. Then we have /new. That's going to have an add list parameter. So let's make a to-do of that as well. To-do app.post /new, right? Add new list. Right. So we've got a note for that. We have to write that route as well. Okay. So what do we have to do to actually make a connection to our database and actually have this query instead of using this fake list array that we have here, right? So the first thing we want to do is we want to connect to our database. I'm going to put these two together. So we'll call this express configuration. Okay, and then we'll say database configuration. Okay. So because I don't write connection strings very often, we're actually just going to go right to the documentation. npm.js, and I'm going to look up MySQL2. I know they're going to give me a good way to just make sure we're connected. Hello? MySQL2. This used to have documentation. What happened? let's go. Oh, we're getting like some random. 18 days ago. All right, let's go to the. Oh, here we go. Well, whatever. So we got our const MySQL, right? We need this. We need the connection string. All right, so we're gonna connect. We're gonna create a connection. Right? MySQL.create connection. The host name is localhost. The username is root. The password in this case we just made this is to do. What do we call it? To do lists. Yep. To do lists. Okay. And there is no password. So now we've got a connection object. Okay. And if we continue to look at the thing, this is how we make queries. Right. So I can copy this in here, and so fetch all open to-do lists from where a user is logged in. Right. So we want to say connection query. Let's clean up this code that they gave us because it's got bad indentation. Okay. So it's getting, right, what is our query that we want to run? So let's pull this up, right? So I want to do select star from to-do list items where, lists, where user ID equals 1, right? Well, I want to get my lists, okay? So if there was multiple lists in here, this would be the query that would give it to me, the ones that belong to me. So I'm going to just copy, I don't need to copy it, I can right here, select, star, well, I like to call these individually, ID, user ID, and title, from lists, where user ID equals, and remember we're going to use a question mark here, so that we can have this be a placeholder, and then the second argument is the actual user ID itself, right? So whatever we have as the user ID. So right here, we're saying let user ID equals 1. And we're doing to do make this pull from a users table. Okay, so we know we're gonna figure out authentication later, but for now we're just gonna like put it in place so that there is something we can test. So the callback function is error. If there's an error, great. Otherwise, it's gonna say results. We don't need the field. Oh, we don't need the fields argument, so I'm gonna take this out. We don't need that at all. Okay, so what I need to do is, right, we're going to do something with the results, but for now, I'm going to just move up res render. I'm going to move all of this into the callback of the query, right? So this is the actual function that is being run when this database connection comes back. So we cannot call res render until after this is done. So it has to be inside the callback here. So this is going to log our console when we hit this page, and if we keep this down here, we should reload our page and see, yep, it gets us an array that has exactly that type of format that we were looking for. Okay. So the other thing that's missing is that we don't have our lists information, our list items, right? So list items are stored in a different query. So select star from, what do we have? Lists. List items, right? It's this stuff, right? So we want to query the database for all the lists that belong to me. Then we want to query the database for all the list items that belong to me, and then create this object. So before we send this out, we actually let's comment this out. We need to make some kind of object, right? Results already has the lists in it, but we want to take all of those, create this into into some kind of thing, but we have to first query the database again to get all the list items, right? So what I probably would do is, all right, so query the database for all the list items. Okay? So let's just start going down that route. All right. So we already have results. This is our array of lists. So let's do this. Let's say, oh, you know what? We can do this all in one query, right? So this is, right? We can join. It's going to be a little bit less efficient, right? So this is going to give us our list itself, but just by adding extra columns, right? So I can say lists.id, lists.userid, lists.title. Okay. What I can do is I can left join list items on list dot ID equals list items dot list ID, right? So if I run this, it's still going to give me the same 3 columns, but you'll see now I've got 3 items as well, right? So I can say list items dot complete, and we also had list items dot item, right? Those were our 2 other fields we cared about. We probably also need list items dot list dot ID, and we'll give this an alias so we don't get them confused. So we'll say as list. We'll call this li ID, okay, and we'll call this one as list ID. Okay, so if you beautify this again, right, perfect. So we're saying select the list ID, select the user ID that it belongs to, select the title of the list, then we're getting the items. Okay, and if we run this now, we have an error in our, yeah, there we go. So we run this now, we're getting a little bit of duplication here in our return, but it happened all in one query, which is better and more efficient than making 2 queries most of the time. Okay, so we've got a list ID, and then we got a list item ID. So what we're really, when we loop in through this results now, if we were to use this exact same query in here, and let's actually make this a template string so we can use multiple lines. Right, it'll be a little bit nicer. Okay. Okay, so it's a template string now. So where user ID equals question mark. And let's move this over 1. Okay, good. So this is our query. Select list ID as list ID, and if we load this page now, oh, we got an app crash. Fake list is not defined. Oh, I commented at this. Let's uncomment this out so that this won't crash. Okay. So now you can see that each of these elements that is coming back from our database here is an array of the list items that come in here, and what we have to do is just loop through this array and create the object that we're expecting in this type of format. Right? So it's close already, but the problem is we have each of these items as being individual, as an individual record, but we need to have those items be in here, and we need the parent to be right. We need the parent to be like the list itself. So what I would probably do at this stage is I'm going to loop through our results to set up our data object. Right? So we can say for let I equal 0, I is less than results length, I plus plus. Okay. So remember right now that each of these is an item in a list. So I need to say let current list equals null. Let, yeah, so that's fine. So I can say if current list and current list does not equal results I dot list ID, right? So that's the property here. So while we're looping through this, if current list does not equal what I'm currently in as a result, okay, I want to store current list. Current list equals results I dot list ID, and I want to create a new object, right, that I can put inside. Right, so I'm going to be building this structure as we go. Okay. Gosh, this is convoluted. Oh, let's see. Is there an easier way to do this? You know what? I'm going to take back everything I said. We're going to do this the easy, simple way first. I'm going to make this do 2 separate queries before we get into complicated structures like this. Okay, so just back out everything. Because doing 2 different queries is more fun than this way. Oh, too far. Oh, too far again. There we go. So we're right back to where we were. So we got our lists from here, right? So now what we need to do is let's loop through these. For let I equals 0, I is less than results dot length I plus plus. Okay, and we need to make our lists array. Let lists equals array. Okay, so for each of these elements, we're going to say lists dot push, and what we're pushing into there is the object itself that we're building. Right, so ID equals results I ID. Title is results I dot title, and items is an empty array. Okay, so we're pushing that into our lists array as we loop through these results. Okay, now what we have to do is make another query, right? We have to make another query. So we'll say connection.query, and now our next query is going to be, stop that. Autocomplete is the worst. Select star. Let's see. We need ID, list ID, item complete from lists. List items where, and then we'll left join lists on list items list ID equals lists dot ID where lists dot user ID equals question mark. Right, so we still need to join to that table so that we can pass our user ID in here, so they can make sure we're just getting our lists. Okay, and if we ran this just to verify that this is working, right, we should be able to copy this, run it in our query browser, change that to a 1, and run. Okay, we got an error. Oh, column. Yeah, so we're gonna have to give it the li dot. So we'll call this as li. Unknown column. Oh, because then we have to change this to li. Good. Cool. So that we're getting the 3 list items that belong to me by doing this query. Okay, and let's change this into a multi-line query so that it doesn't look so bad. Select from left join. Okay, and then we'll put in our where clause down there. Good. And there's no right or wrong answer for how you choose to break up your queries like this. I just want it to not go off the page to the right, and so I'm going to give it a little bit of breathing room here. All right, so then our function that gets called when we do this, right, is error and then results. Okay, and then we're done. So let's put this back to here. Good. Actually, I'll leave it as a separate line. All right, so when this is finally done, that's when we will finally call res render. Okay, and instead of sending in fake lists, we're going to send in lists. Okay, so what we have to do is, now that we've got these items, right, we need to for var I, let I equals 0, I is less than results out length I plus plus. Okay, and then we'll say okay, so we have to find we're gonna have to find the list by its ID, but we did not store the lists by their ID, so that's a problem. And so I'm rethinking our data model here, right? We have this being an array, but I'm not going to know which list I'm in if I'm treating this like an array, right? So what I probably want to do is make this an object so that I'll have the ID of the list ID so that I can reference back to it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change lists into an object, and I'm going to simply do instead of list.push, I'm going to say lists results I.id equals, right, so that I'll store this object as an object that I can reference by its ID. Right? That'll be easier than dealing with an array and trying to be like, is this in index 1 or 2 or 3? Right? So we're going to have to change our template, because right now this just kind of assumes we're using an array here, but we're not now. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So now I'm in here. While I loop through my elements, right, I've got the list ID that it belongs to. So now I can say lists results I list ID equals, and then that's going to be an object of its own, right? Or it's in items, right? Items. So we're going to make this an array itself. Yeah, let's leave this an array. I'm going to say dot items dot push is going to be our object, right? So here it is, right? ID results I dot ID, item results I dot item, and complete results I dot complete. Okay. So I'm keeping items an array, but now it's inside a list that is not an array, it's an object that we're referencing by ID. Okay? Okay. So now, when I call res render, it's going to call index, it's going to go to to-do list, but now this is going to break because when we're in here, to-do list is now not an array, it is as an object, right? And it has keys, right? So how do we do this in JavaScript? I always let's play with this and see if we can figure it out. So let's say var obj equals let's say 1 2 3 4 something true. We're just making like a fake object here so we can make sure we know how to loop through it correctly. And we'll say 5 4 3 yeah something true. Okay. So if we look at object, right, it's got 2 elements in here. If we do dot length, this is the problem. Dot length is undefined because it's not an array. But it does have keys, right? Keys. Oh, it's object.keys. Object.keys obj. Right? That tells us a length. That's probably what we want to do, right? So so instead of we'll do object.keys to-do lists dot length. And then instead of here, we want to do the for var in syntax. So instead of this, right, we say for let list ID equals, or excuse me, in to-do lists, right? So objects are even easier to loop through, right? For let key in obj, right? Console.log key, console.log obj key, right? So if it's an object, it's even easier to loop through. We don't have to worry about counting. We don't have to worry about indexing. We get a thing. So we're gonna have to change this a little bit. So list ID is now our object. That's our list. So then we say list ID dot title. So this needs to be list ID dot items. That's still an array, but we have to change list ID. List ID. Yeah, good. This should all work now. List ID. Alright, we saved it. Let's restart it. Reload our page. Something broke completely. Cannot read property length of undefined. On line 44. Line 44. What do we got here? For let I equals 0. I is less than results.length. Why is this breaking? Do we have we must have an error in our SQL. Let's test this and say 1. Yep. Okay, perfect. Column ID in field list is ambiguous. So we have an error in our SQL that we already fixed once. So we're going to say list items.id. Good. So now our code should reload and it should work. Perfect. So our first to-do list now has test, test2, and buy a Snickers, which is exactly what is in our database. list items. Test 2, buy a Snickers. And you'll notice test 2 is complete. Test 2 over here is complete. So now we got to write those routes to actually add new items. We got to add a route to delete items and mark them as complete. But we're kind of up and running. We built an app that mirrors what we had before, but it's completely being loaded from our backend, right? If someone goes to our page without JavaScript turned on, they are able to see and interact with and use our product because the HTML coming out is HTML that we are generating using EJS templates, right? EJS is generating this page for us. It's still JavaScript behind the scenes. When we go to our route, right, it's kind of crazy because we're making two separate queries. We're saying, hey, when I go to slash, we'll figure out the user ID thing later, but we're saying, hey, give me a list of all of this user's lists. Then when it gets those back from the database, it's calling this function. It's like we can turn this off now. We don't need a console log anymore. Then we're creating our list object. It's looping through them and kind of getting that object set up for us. Then we're making a second query. And when that second query is done, it's going to give us all of our list items. And inside of that, it's adding each of those items to that items array that we have up here that's empty and waiting for us to go. Then and finally, after we have that object put in place, we're going to call that render page and pass it our to-do lists object. Okay? Go ahead, Josh.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, all this JavaScript is being executed on the back end.
Yes.
What is the need for the front end then? Like, if you're on a team and you have someone specifically working on as a front end JavaScript developer, like, can't you just take that code and push it to the back end?
Yeah. So JavaScript on the front end, and I've kind of been hinting at this whole time, is it's there for progressive enhancement. It's for making things look better, be a little snappier, right? We still have to figure out, like, if I click on test right now, right, it does nothing because this is just a list item. So we're still probably going to want to have JavaScript that has an add event listener that fires something off to our server to mark this as complete. But now we're not just doing this entirely in the front end. It's actually being stored on a server, on a database. So I could reload this page 1,000 times or go to it from my mobile phone or go to it from anywhere, and it would still work because the actual data and the state of the system is stored in MySQL. We'll still need JavaScript a little bit on the front end, but now we're trying to make it so that the JavaScript is just there as a nice feature to have, but that if I turn JavaScript off, I just turned it off right now, this page still loads. So someone who doesn't have JavaScript or is on an older machine, we'd have to figure out what to do about this, but that's not too hard, right? We can put an anchor tag in here so that it can go to somewhere, right? And maybe we'll show that off as like how we go next, and then once we have a full featured working website application, then we'll actually add JavaScript to make it nicer on the front end. Very rarely do we write much JavaScript on the front end anymore, and the exceptions to that are like for specific things that you want to happen on client side. Like all of these database queries, for example, are not free. They're not. The computer is fast, but you can imagine if this had 1,000 users on it, right? That's 1,000 queries happening all the time to get all of my lists and things. And so if you're building a product or an application that has like a big list of data and there's a whole bunch of users hitting it, well, you might want to use JavaScript to let them like filter and sort that list so that it doesn't go back to the server all the time whenever somebody wants to just sort by a different field. Because you've already sent the data to them once, just let them redisplay it on the front end. That's going to save you a ton of AWS bills.
That makes sense. Okay.
Mm-hmm. But almost always when I'm building something new, I'm going to build beautiful backend code that generates HTML so that it's like up and running perfectly, and only after it works perfectly and after I've got customers and users and people are paying for what I'm doing, then I'll spend time to go through with a front end developer and be like, okay, this analytics dashboard, that everyone is using all the time is making 14 database queries that are really, really hitting our server pretty hard. Can we remove some of them? Can we make this page cache or something, right? We'll start to look for performance improvements. All right, it's 7 o'clock. Let's take one last break, maybe come back at 7:10, and see if we can't make a little bit more progress on this to-do list product. Cool. See my screen, we're recording, off and running. So we got to this point where it loads from a database, everything's good. So we know we need to make some new routes, we need to create lists, and we know we need to create new items, and we need to be able to mark them as complete or incomplete. So back to our code. Let's just do this as quickly as possible. Right, so we know we're going to call app post. That's going to create a new item. Okay, and the item is going to have a name of item. So let's start writing that one. So we're going to say app.post/list, and then we're going to use the special parameter thing that Express gives us, and we're going to say list ID. Okay, and that's going to get a rec and a res, and is a function. All right, so inside of here, just taking notes so we can like think out loud and get it all down on paper, we're going to insert the new record into our database, okay, and then redirect back to slash, like the slash route, okay, and then app.post, creating a new list is pretty much the same thing, app.post, and that's to new, right, gets a rec and a res, and that does the same thing. Right? Insert a new record into the lists table. And then redirect back to slash. Right? Because slash already exists, right? It already loads all of our lists. If we insert a record into this database and then we redirect to that previous page, it will display all of our new records. So let's do that. The first thing we need to do, because we have this form element in here, right? The way Express works is that we have to turn on, as a part of the configuration, we need to turn on app.use, and we'll say express.url encoded, and then we'll say extended is true. Okay. So this just lets it know that, hey, we're going to be getting some parameters sent to us. These need to be encoded so that spaces are properly handled and all that kind of stuff. This just tells us that we can use those form values. So when we're in here, we need to make a connection. Oh, we already have a connection, so we're going to say connection.query. Okay, and the first thing, not far down enough. The first thing is insert into list items values. We need to put in our properties here, so we're going to say insert into list items. We don't need to include ID, but we do need to include list ID, and then item, right? We don't need to include complete because it's going to be defaulted to 0, right? So the default value is 0 for complete. So that when we add an item in here, it's marked as not done yet. Okay? And then we'll put values, and we'll put in 2 placeholders, question mark, question mark. Okay? So that's parameter 1. Parameter 2 here, argument 2, is those 2 parameters, right? So list ID is coming from rec dot, I always forget where these are stored. Let's see if we can find this. Google form post express. It's in some, I like forms express. Let's see if we can rec.body. Yeah, rec.body dot, and then the name of the element, right? So item. Rec.body.item is our first parameter, and our second parameter, that's our second parameter. So rec dot, you know what? It's rec.params.list ID, right? Because we put it up here as a part of our URL, right? When we're posting this form, we're saying /list and then the ID of the list, and so we get that from rec.params. Rec.body has the form information, and that has the item element that we put in as a text area. So when this is done, right? Function. Well, let's do it ES6 way. Error is the first one. Results is the second one, right? And that function, instead of doing anything, because we should assume that like if we're here, right? We don't care about the results. Results is going to tell us, hey, there was one record updated, right? Maybe we will console.log just for safety. Inserted new list item. Okay, and then we're going to do res redirect back to slash. Okay, so now node is running again. This code, in theory, should work. So let's add a new item in here. Let's say take a nap. Perfect. And now it's in here in our database, in our table, because we inserted this record and we redirected back to slash. So new is going to be the same kind of thing, right? So connection.query, and we will do insert into lists. This time we need user ID and title. That's the name of our list. Values, question mark, question mark. Okay. Then we're going to do, right, so user ID, we're going to fake this here as well. So we'll say let user ID equals 1. User ID. And then the second one is title. So that's going to be rec.body. What do we call this? Add list. Rec.body.add list. Add list. Okay. And then it's going to take a air results, another function, and we are going to simply do res.redirect slash. Okay. So now if I click on add new list here and I say grocery list shows up as a list, and I can put in beef, broccoli, sandwich, right? On and on down the list. So Josh was asking, like, why would we write front-end JavaScript anymore, right? Because you'll notice when I type something in here, ham, and I hit enter, or I click the plus sign, this whole page reloads, and I'm no longer focused on this element. Like, I can't just type a list real quickly like we had built before. So we are still going to need some front-end JavaScript somewhere to handle these types of edge cases. Okay? So we've got it kind of working, right? The only thing that's missing now is I can't click on these anymore and mark them as complete. So let's fix that the formal, like, boring HTML way, right? So right now these are all list items. They're going to have either a class of done or a class of if it's complete, it's going to be marked as done. So I'm going to simply wrap this whole thing in an anchor tag, right? Anchor tags are how we link things in, the JavaScript or in the HTML world. So I'm going to say ahref, and I'm going to say item. Let's call this item.id, right? So it's going to be /item/id, and then maybe we'll put in complete. That makes sense to me. Okay, and then /a. So now all of these are going to be actual links, right? We're going to fix the style of this with CSS, right? So let's say list li item, yeah. So we'll do dot list li dot item a. Let's do color. Let's make it black, and we'll say text decoration none. Okay, so now it's kind of back to how it looked before, but now there are links. If I click on this, it takes me to item 3 complete. Okay, item 6 complete. So I'm sure you can imagine we're going to need a route to do exactly this. So we'll say app.get, right? These are get routes. Mark an item complete with list item ID complete. Right, that's kind of our route here. So we'll say item ID complete. Right? Rec res. That's our handler. So update the item in the database as complete. That's pretty simple. So connection dot query. Yeah. So who remembers the syntax? Who can tell me the syntax to make one of these items complete? Just from a purely database perspective. And none of the graduates of Augusta Tech who have taken database classes are eligible to answer this question. What is the update syntax for a database?
Are you asking like the CRUD
I'm just asking for the SQL syntax for what I need to write here to update and mark, like we have this database schema. I'm going to change the value of complete from 0 to 1. So how do I update a record in this list items table to go from 0 to 1 when I have an item ID? We kind of covered this briefly yesterday, but what's the SQL syntax for updating a record?
Is it like update and then the table name?
Yep. List items. Then what?
And set. And then we're trying to update the item, so it is.
So I'll type this while you go. Update list items set. That's where we're at right now.
Complete
We want to make it 1, right? Complete equals 1.
equals 1.
How do I know which one I'm updating?
To do where?
Where? Where what?
List ID.
No, list ID
Oh,
is the
yeah.
list that it's attached to.
Or title.
There's no title in the list items table. And if you recall, we do have a...
Oh, we're item.
Where what?
Item.
Nope, there's no item. Item is the full string. But we have an ID here, right? We're going to pass that in. Item ID.
Okay.
Where
item ID.
ID equals question mark, because we're gonna put in rec.params.item ID, right? Cool, not bad. Yeah, very close for something very brand new. So update items set complete equals 1, where ID equals question mark. Okay. The second argument to connection.query is the variables that we're replacing with those placeholders. So we're gonna say rec.params.item ID. Okay, and then the last thing is our function. So function error results, and then what we simply want to do here is res redirect to slash. Okay, so now, right, because we turn these into anchor tags, if I click this, now it's marked as complete. Broccoli's done, sandwich done, ham done. Okay.
You go back to your code.
Yep.
So where is it? Where are you getting the ability to strike through?
That comes from our CSS and from our
Okay.
template, right? So we're saying if
Okay.
the value of item complete is done, is set to true, we're putting in the class of done. And if you recall from the other day when we built this, we have a class in here, li.item.done has a text declaration of line through.
Okay.
All right, so that handles marking as complete. We probably need to do the same thing where if it's done, right? So, right, we can use that same ternary operator. We can say item.complete. Instead of it being done, we'll return delete or complete, right? So, if the item is done, we want the URL to be item ID delete. Otherwise, we want it to be item ID complete. Right. So the next state would be, right, all of these we want it to be to item 7 delete. So now this is where it gets kind of sketchy, right? We can do the same exact line of code, just with delete instead of complete. Right. Delete the item from the database. Okay. So instead of update list items, we're going to do delete from list items where ID equals question mark. Same item ID, rec params ID, but now it's going to be completely gone. So this is kind of scary, right? I'm going to delete broccoli. It's going to disappear forever from the database. Boop. Done. Disappear forever from the database. Marked beef is complete. Disappear forever. And now I'm left with an empty list, ready for me to put in more groceries for next week. When I can say milk, cat food, tuna, right? And you can see that our database has persistently maintained this list of all the things that are in here, right? Some are complete. This is from list ID 1. These are all the ones in the first list. Test 2, buy a Snickers, take a nap. These are the ones in list 2, milk, cat food, tuna. And none of them are complete. I click milk, okay, and I rerun this query. Now milk is set to 1. We got it so that we can create new lists. We've got it so we can add items to our lists. We probably also want to come in here because it's going to drive me crazy when it does this. We want to go into our template, and for these items, we want to set autocomplete tools off so that it doesn't pre-populate items in here, and we want to do the same thing down here. Autocomplete is off. Okay. So now when no little suggestion box pops up for us. Cool. Any questions? We built a full featured to-do list. Like, we saved a bunch of time because we didn't have to work on design or anything. We did a pretty good job with that last week. But what we have here is now, this is like I could deploy this to a server, and assuming I have a database as well, right? Like, anyone on the planet could make to-do items, to-do lists, and use this as a real tool. I could put in my items, my to-do list here on my computer, then go to the store and pull it up on my phone and be checking things off as I get them. Right? Like, we built an actual web app in, I don't know, like a total of 2 hours from start to finish, even including the time we spent last week doing a little bit of design. But this design isn't that complicated. We just added border radiuses and some little cutesy hover effects. Like, there's not much to it. That's the power of back-end programming. Right? Our HTML is very simple, but because we're able to use native JavaScript, we're able to loop over all these cards so that when we get this information from the database, right? We get all of our elements from the database. We're putting it into an object that our template can loop through. This is why I personally think there's so much power in back-end programming. You can imagine if I wanted to, like, start my own company today, I could spend maybe another 5 or 6 hours polishing this up, making it so that, like, you can log into this page, right? And you can have a user account, and maybe it's free for up to 5 lists. But if you want more than 5 lists, you got to pay $1 a month. Well, now I've got a business. I've just created value out of nothing by building a simple app. Think of all the dumb apps in the App Store, like Flappy Bird and stupid crap like that made millions of dollars. You guys will all have the skill and ability to do exactly that with just a little bit of time at the keyboard. Or if you go get a job. I mean, the reason you're getting paid in your future employment is because they're expecting you to take their current business and add features that make them more money, that make their customers happier. Right? Docket, my current company, like, it's exactly this, just with a bunch of forms that are stuff specific to lawyers. There's not much magic here. It just seems scary, but the fundamentals, you're going to use them forever. Go ahead, Josh.
So the apps that you download from Apple or iTunes, what are they using JavaScript, or is that a different language?
No. So almost every platform is going to have a different language. iPhones, they're going to either run Objective-C or they're going to run Swift. Those are really like the two main languages of iOS products. There are some exceptions. So like environments like Unity 3D, which is a game engine, lets you write C# code. And what Unity does behind the scenes is they're compiling into Objective-C or Swift. I don't know what they actually compile into. But native on iOS is Objective-C or Swift. Native on Android is Java, really. And so there are other engines like Unity that compiles C# into Java so that it can run on Android machines. But the cool thing about the web is that you can write whatever you want on the web, and as long as it outputs HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, iPhones can use it, Androids can use it, computers can use it, tablets can use it, Nokia flip phones can use it. No, not Nokia flip phones, never. So web development makes it so that you can run your code everywhere. The web is like the last open free horizon where you can just build stuff. You don't need anyone's permission. It's relatively inexpensive. Like $5 server could run this product forever. Right? I might want a nicer graphic. I'm going to want an API or something so I can tie it into other things. But, I mean, 15 years ago, I could build a to-do list app like this and make probably $30,000 a month. Maybe 20 years ago. And you see it took like, I would maybe spend a week total on this. And this is the kind of thing when we encourage you to participate and attend hackathons. Like, you're just trying to get it to work, right? You're trying to get the minimum amount of functionality in there, over the span of 4 hours or overnight. Like, as a group, you're just trying to build stuff that does something. And then if it's interesting, maybe you keep working on it. Maybe you add more features. What else? You guys just need more practice? Okay. Well, here's what I want from everyone. You guys have all been working on your own little apps. The Roast app. I don't know what Olivia's been doing recently, but I'm sure you're working on something cool. Karif, Eric, all of you guys have been working on stuff for you. Now's the time to like really polish it and get it over the edge. So what I want you to do for the rest of the week, for all of your lab time, is to get one version of that ready to go by Thursday for show and tell, running as an express app with EJS. During lab time, I'm here to help you. Selena's here to help you. Eric's here to help you. Other Eric, Eric 3, Eric 2, however many Erics we have. We have so many Erics. We got Erics galore. Every Eric in this class will help you during lab time. By Thursday, after our guest speaker is done, I want everyone to show us what is working, what is not. Okay, so this is open season to build something super cool that you can get done by Thursday. If you have to rip out everything you've done to date, because we've been mostly focused on the front end, to redo it in the back end, to do it with a database, do it. Like, your code's not going anywhere. Start a brand new repository and use your other code, pull it up in a second monitor, and use it as inspiration. Like, this is what my HTML is going to look like. Okay? For your Roast app is a good example because we've been using it as an example. Like, all those minute entries, right? Like, that's just a table with table rows, right? So you could loop through that in EJS to display your right. You can loop through those minutes to display each of those tables. Any other questions? All right. Do you want to add more features to this, or do you guys want to be done, or what do you want to do?
I think my brain needs a little bit of a break to absorb it all.
Okay. Fair enough. I'll upload the video of tonight's thing because it's pretty condensed. Like, we built something from scratch that actually works in like 2 hours. And then I would encourage you to review it and then get started on building something cool. Because for the rest of this class, right, we're going to start a group project soon. Then you're all going to be working on the same thing, trying to get something really cool done. And then we'll start practicing for interviews and getting ready to do stuff. But these are the fundamentals. Like, everything there is to know in theory. Like, it's just a matter of practicing and getting it to be second nature to build anything. Cool. All right.